Mom, your savings are useless. Just sign here. The words hit me harder than any slap could. David, my only son, tossed a stack of papers onto the kitchen table. The sound was sharp, like a gavel striking down in some cruel courtroom. I froze. My fingers hovered over the edge of the folder, trembling. The paper inside looked harmless enough. White sheets, black ink, neat lines. But I could feel the weight of betrayal pressing down on me as if those pages were bricks. The kitchen clock ticked above us, each second loud and merciless. I could hear my own breath, shallow and ragged, fighting to stay steady. The late afternoon light poured through the window, harsh and cold, bleaching the room into a colorless blur. I was 74 years old. My name is Margaret Lewis. And in that moment, in my own kitchen, I realized I was standing on the edge of a cliff I had never seen coming. "Sign it, Mom," David pressed, his tone clipped, impatient. His jaw tightened the way it did when he wanted something and wouldn't take no for an answer. "This is just paperwork. You don't need to overthink it." I swallowed hard, my throat dry like sandpaper. I picked up the first page. The letters swam. My name was typed neatly at the top, a space waiting for my signature at the bottom. A power of attorney. At least, that's what it looked like through my blurred vision. The rustle of paper sounded deafening. My hands shook so badly, the sheets slipped and scattered across the table like broken glass. One slid to the floor. I stared at it, unable to bend down, my knees locked with dread. David sighed loudly. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've had your time. Your savings aren't doing anything. They're useless sitting there. We can invest it, make it grow." Useless. The word burned through me. These were not just savings. They were 40 years of ironing shirts until midnight, of standing on aching feet at the laundry shop, of saying no to new shoes so I could pay his tuition. Every dollar was a piece of my life. And now my son, my own flesh and blood, dismissed it all with one word. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails biting into the wood. My chest heaved. I could smell the faint trace of burnt toast still lingering from breakfast, absurdly sharp in the tense air. Even that seemed to mock me. Something charred, something wasted. I wanted to speak, but the words lodged in my throat. My tongue felt heavy, my lips dry. How do you tell your son, the boy you carried, the boy you fed, the boy you once rocked to sleep, that he had just shattered you? Instead, I looked at him. Really looked. The lines on his forehead deepened as he frowned, his eyes cold and calculating in a way I had never allowed myself to notice before. He was no longer the child who once clung to my skirt. He was a man who saw me as an obstacle, or worse, a resource to be drained. A hot tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a tone meant to sound reasonable, almost tender. But underneath, I caught the steel. "Mom, this is for everyone's good. Trust me." Trust. I almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky breath. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the relentless ticking of the clock. I pushed the folder slightly away. My voice cracked when I finally whispered, "David, why are you doing this to me?" He didn't flinch. "Because it's the smart thing to do. Stop being stubborn." And there it was, the son I thought I knew, gone. In his place stood someone I barely recognized. I sat back in my chair, the wood digging into my spine, and for the first time in 74 years, I felt completely hollow. Not because I was poor, not because I was old, but because my son, the person I trusted most, had just told me my life's work meant nothing. At that moment, I realized I was no longer their mother, just a bank they wanted to drain. When David's words cut me, "Your savings are useless," my mind slipped backward, as if my whole life unspooled at once. I saw myself again, at 24, standing behind the counter of Lewis Laundry, my apron damp with steam, the hiss of the iron sharp in my ears. 40 years I gave to that shop. 40 years of starch and soap, of pressing collars until my fingers split at the edges. Every quarter I slid into the cash tin felt like a seed. Save, Margaret, I used to whisper to myself while folding stiff uniforms. Save, because one day David will need it. And oh, how he needed it. When he turned 18, tuition letters piled on our kitchen table like storm clouds. 20,000 for 4 years of college. I worked double shifts, ironed until midnight, ate soup from the same pot 3 nights straight. I handed him the check with shaking hands, proud but exhausted. Mom, don't worry, David said, hugging me with a boy's careless strength. I'll pay you back someday. Someday. That word became a ghost that haunted every receipt I saved. After college, there was the car. A second-hand Honda, still $7,500 with taxes and registration. I remember counting the bills twice before sliding them across the dealer's desk. My palms were slick with sweat, though the showroom air was cool. David grinned wide, keys jingling in his fist, and said the same line again, Mom, don't worry, someday. Then came the house. He and his wife found a tidy condo on Maple Street. The down payment alone, $15,000, would have drowned them. I opened my wooden box, the one where I kept decades of receipts, folded bills and bank slips. The lid creaked like an old secret giving way. Inside were pieces of me. Yellowed paper, faded ink, the weight of sacrifice. I pulled out the savings and handed them over. You're the best, Mom, David said, his arms slung around my shoulders. We'll pay you back someday. That box still sits in my bedroom closet. Each time I lift the lid, I swear I hear the echoes of my youth. Iron hissing, coins clinking, my own tired sighs at midnight. It isn't just a container. It's a time capsule of every piece of myself I gave away. I should have noticed the pattern. I should have realized, someday, was a word built from smoke. But at the time, I believed. I told myself, this is what mothers do. This is love. This is legacy. W.A. And yet, I remember one winter evening, scrubbing shirts at the shop when my back seized with pain. I had been on my feet 14 hours. The snow outside pressed against the window like white silence, but inside the boiler roared, suffocatingly hot. I leaned against the counter, dizzy. Why am I still doing this? I whispered into the empty shop. Why am I still giving when my bones ache, when my lungs burn? No one answered. Only the hiss of steam, the endless pile of laundry. I carried that question home with me, tucked between the receipts in the wooden box. Sometimes, when David visited, I'd glance at the box in the corner of the room. He never noticed it. To him, it was just a plain container. To me, it was my heart carved into oak. I also remember the small humiliations I swallowed. The birthdays when he said he couldn't afford to come by with a gift, though I had just wired him $500 for his mortgage. The Christmas when his wife rolled her eyes at my thrift store sweater, while I'd emptied my wallet to buy toys for their children. Still, I kept giving. I told myself, it doesn't matter if they notice. It matters that they're safe, that they're happy. But each receipt told a different story. $200 for their electric bill, $600 for a broken water heater, $1,200 for braces on my granddaughter's teeth. Numbers stacked like bricks on my chest. And every time I slid another slip of paper into the wooden box, I whispered, someday. Someday he'll see. Someday he'll understand. Someday he'll thank me. But someday never came. Now, sitting at the table with those new papers in front of me, I can almost feel the wooden box pressing against my ribs from inside. The weight of decades, of quarters and dollars and sacrifices, and the bitter truth settles in my stomach. All those nights I pushed through pain, all those years I gave without question, led me here. To my son, standing over me, telling me the savings were useless. Maybe the real useless thing wasn't the money. Maybe it was my blind hope that love would ever be enough. That night, the house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator like a distant engine. The only other sound was the faint scratching of branches against the window, as if even the trees outside were restless. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where David had tossed those papers earlier that week. The lamp above me cast a yellow circle of light on the surface. In front of me was my old laptop, the screen glowing pale blue against the dark room. I opened my online banking. The numbers blinked back at me. 3462.17. That was it. After 40 years of work, after decades of scrubbing, ironing, sacrificing, I had just a few $1,000s left to my name. My throat tightened. My chest felt hollow. I pressed a hand against my ribcage as though I could hold myself together, as though I could keep the pieces from scattering. If I keep signing, I whispered into the empty kitchen, what will be left of me? The silence answered me back, cruel and sharp. Nothing. I thought of the wooden box in my closet, heavy with receipts. Every slip of paper, every faded ink mark, was a breadcrumb leading me to this moment. And for what? For a son who told me my life savings were useless. The tears came hot, sudden. I buried my face in my hands and let them fall. But in the middle of that flood, something inside me shifted. It was small at first, like a single ember glowing in ash. A stubborn spark. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my sleeve. My breath hitched, but my eyes cleared. I wasn't dead yet. My life wasn't over. And if I gave them one more signature, one more dollar, I would truly vanish. I straightened in the chair, opened the bank's settings, and clicked on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was. The automatic monthly transfer to David's joint account. 1,200. Every month, bleeding out of me like a wound I had chosen not to close. My finger hovered over the mouse. It shook, trembled like a leaf caught in the wind. Cancel. One small word. I thought of all the times I had chosen yes instead of no. All the times I had stayed silent, thinking love meant endless sacrifice. All the nights I had told myself, someday while pushing another receipt into the wooden box. Enough. I pressed the button. A pop-up flashed. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? Dogga. My heart pounded. My finger trembled again, but this time it pressed harder, firmer, deliberate. Yes. Confirm. Click. The screen blinked, then refreshed. The transfer was gone. I leaned back, my whole body shaking. It felt as if I had just cut a chain that had been strangling me for years. My chest expanded, filling with air I hadn't realized I'd been denied. The tears came again, but they were different. They weren't just grief. They were release. For the first time in 40 years, I whispered aloud, my voice steadier now. I chose myself over them. I closed the laptop gently, as if tucking a child into bed. The kitchen was still the same, dim, quiet, lonely. But something had changed. I had changed. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked to the closet. I pulled out the wooden box. The lid creaked as always, but tonight the sound wasn't a wound. It was a memory. I ran my fingers over the old receipts. Some were yellow and brittle, the ink faded to gray, but I could see the numbers clearly. 500, 1,200, 15,000. My life, measured in ink. I closed the lid and whispered to it, no more. Then I set the box back into the closet, turned off the kitchen light, and climbed into bed. For the first time in decades, I slept without my phone on the nightstand, without waiting for it to buzz with another request, another demand. And though my dreams were jagged and restless, when I opened my eyes at dawn, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A flicker of freedom. It didn't take long before David came back. This time, he didn't come alone. His wife, Claire, trailed behind him, her heels clicking against my wooden floor like little hammers of judgment. The knock on the door wasn't a knock at all. It was a pounding. 3 heavy blows that rattled the glass pane. I opened it anyway. David pushed past me before I could speak. Claire followed, her perfume leaving a sharp trail in the air. They carried no warmth, only the cold bite of entitlement. He threw the same folder onto my coffee table, the papers fanning out. His voice was harsh, almost shouting. "Mom, I'm done being patient. If you don't sign this, you'll regret it." The words echoed in the living room, bouncing off the framed photographs of a family I no longer recognized. My hands curled around the arm of the sofa. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. Then I said, with a calmness that surprised even me, "I regret nothing more than raising a son who sees me as a burden." For a moment, silence. The clock ticked in the background. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed like slits of glass. David's face flushed red. He leaned down, close enough for me to smell the bitterness of coffee on his breath. "Don't play games with me, Mom. You're old. You can't handle your money. You'll just waste it on nonsense. We know what's best." Claire's voice slipped in, sweet on the surface but sharp beneath. "She's being dramatic, David. Just sign, Margaret. Stop making this harder on everyone." I looked from one to the other. My own son, my daughter-in-law, the people who should have been my comfort in old age. Instead, they were wolves circling, waiting for me to fall. "Harder?" I repeated, my voice low. "I worked 40 years in a laundry shop. I pressed shirts until my fingers cracked. I skipped meals to pay tuition. You think this?" I gestured at the papers. "Is hard? No, Claire. This is betrayal." Her smile slipped. David slammed his hand down on the table. The papers jumped. "Stop being so selfish," he barked. "You don't even use the money. You just let it sit there. We could turn it into something real." Selfish. The word almost made me laugh. I stood slowly, my knees stiff but steady. I faced him fully, my back no longer hunched, my shoulders squared. "Selfish?" I asked. "I gave you $20,000 for college, 15,000 for your condo, thousands more for your bills, your car, your children. Every dollar I saved was poured into your life. And now, when I finally keep a piece for myself, I'm selfish?" David's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted toward Claire, searching for backup. She stepped forward, her voice icy. "If you don't sign, we'll take this to court. We'll prove you're not capable of managing your finances. Do you really want strangers deciding for you?" There it was. The threat. The line they were willing to cross. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice came out clear. I would rather face strangers than surrender to my own children's greed. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. David shook his head, his fists clenched. "You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I do," I said, meeting his eyes with every ounce of strength I had left. "I know exactly what I'm saying." I stepped closer. Close enough that he had to take a half step back. My voice rose, not in a scream, but in a steady, unbreakable tone. "I am not your forgotten wallet. I am a woman with my own key." The room fell into a silence so sharp it could cut. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. David stared at me, stunned. Claire tugged at his sleeve, whispering something I couldn't hear. Without another word, they gathered their folder, their empty threats, and stormed out, the slam of the door shaking the frame. I stood alone in the quiet, my chest heaving, my palms damp. But beneath the trembling, I felt something new unfurling inside me. Something fierce, something free. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a mother, or a giver, or a shadow. I was Margaret Lewis, 74, and I still held the key to my own life. I thought the confrontation in my living room would be the worst of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. The paper inside reeked of ink and intimidation. Notice of legal action. My son and his wife had hired a lawyer. The words blurred as I read them. A petition to grant guardianship, evidence of incapacity, consent documents. Consent. The supposed documents bore my name, my signature. But I hadn't signed them. My knees went weak. I dropped into the nearest chair, clutching the pages with trembling hands. The pen strokes mimicked mine perfectly, but I knew my own writing. I could see the difference. The way the L in Lewis looped too neatly, the way the M in Margaret lacked my tiny quiver at the end. They had forged me. The air in the room thickened. I felt the betrayal like smoke filling my lungs. My son had taken my trust, my love, and now my very name. I pressed the papers flat on the table and whispered, "They're willing to erase me entirely." When I told my friends from church, their faces paled. "Margaret," Ruth said, gripping my arm, "court battles are expensive, stressful. Maybe you should just let it go." I shook my head so hard, my hairpins rattled loose. "No. If I let this go, I vanish. I'll be alive, but erased." Even my cousin in Ohio called after hearing whispers through the family. "Don't fight them," she warned. "You'll lose more than money. Families don't survive court." Her words lodged in my chest like stones. But then I remembered David's eyes, cold, unflinching, as he called me selfish. And I knew. Our family had already fractured. One evening, as I sat on the porch with the envelope in my lap, my neighbor, Mrs. Seven, Tanaka came over with a plate of steamed buns. She must have seen the storm in my eyes. "What is it, Margaret?" she asked softly. I handed her the papers. She scanned them, her brow furrowing. When she looked up, her gaze burned with quiet fire. "Margaret, you're stronger than you think. Don't let them erase your life." Her words clung to me through the night like a lifeline. So I began to prepare. I bought a small spiral notebook, plain blue cover, and labeled it in block letters. Call log. Every time the phone rang, every threat, every demand, I wrote the date, the hour, the exact words. June 14, 8747 p.m. David said, "If you fight this, we'll drag your name through the mud." Call June 17, 2010 p.m. Claire laughed. "Courts love stories about helpless old ladies. You'll lose fast." I filled page after page, my handwriting steadier with each entry. What began as fear transformed into evidence. I also dug out my bank ledgers, the thick folders where I had printed every statement. Each line told my story. Money withdrawn for tuition, for mortgages, for medical bills that weren't mine. I highlighted the amounts in neon yellow until the numbers glowed like warning flares. At night, when the house was too quiet, I opened the wooden box again. Receipts crackled under my fingertips. Each slip of paper whispered, "Who gave? You bled. You bled. You mattered. Is." And for the first time, instead of shame, I felt resolve. The harassment escalated. One morning, I found an anonymous letter taped to my door. "Don't embarrass the family. Sign the papers quietly. CO." The handwriting was different, but the intent was the same. My stomach knotted, but I refused to tear it up. I slid it into the call log notebook, taped neatly between the pages. Evidence. Another time, a strange man in a suit showed up pretending to be from the bank, but when I asked for identification, he stammered and left. Later, I discovered he was a friend of David's lawyer. They wanted to corner me, confuse me, make me slip. But I wrote it down. Date, time, description. Another entry in my growing arsenal. Late one night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, rimmed red. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something else. "Steel," I whispered to the woman staring back at me. "They think you're weak. They think you'll fold." But you've bent all your life, Margaret. It's time to stand. Word spread among the neighbors. Some shook their heads, murmuring pity. Others offered small comforts. Mrs. Tanaka left vegetables on my porch every Sunday. The mailman paused to ask if I was doing all right. These small acts were anchors, reminders I wasn't entirely alone. Still, the fear gnawed at me. At night, the walls seemed to close in. What if the court believed them? What if my careful notebooks, my receipts, my words? What if none of it mattered? But each time doubt crept in, I opened my call log. I flipped through the pages, saw the ugly words written in black and white, and felt fire in my chest. I would not let lies speak louder than my truth. One evening, as rain hammered against the roof, the phone rang again. My hand hovered over it. I let it ring, then clicked record on the answering machine. David's voice spilled out, sharp and rehearsed. "Mom, the lawyer says, if you don't comply, we'll have to push for a competency evaluation. You don't want strangers poking into your life, do you? Just sign." I stood in the hallway, listening to his voice echo in the dark. And instead of tears, I felt clarity. Let them push. Let them try. I had my notebook, my receipts, my neighbors who believed me, and above all, I had myself. That night, before bed, I wrote one final line in my call log: "I will not be erased." Then I closed the notebook, placed it gently beside the wooden box, and turned off the light. The storm outside still raged, but inside, a different kind of storm had begun, one that would carry me, not destroy me. It was late, the kind of night when the house creaks louder than usual, when shadows stretch across the floor like long fingers. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling around the threats, the phone calls, the letters. Restless, I went to the kitchen for tea. On the counter sat the envelope David had thrown at me days before. I had shoved it aside, too afraid to open it fully. But that night, something pulled me back. My hands trembled as I slid the papers out. I spread them across the table under the weak glow of the lamp. Page after page, cold words in black ink. And then, my breath caught. There it was, a power of attorney, my name printed at the top, and beneath it, a signature that looked exactly like mine. Almost. I leaned closer, my heart thudding. The loop in the M was too smooth. The curl of the S in Lewis was sharp, not shaky like mine always was after hours of ironing. It was me. But it wasn't me. I pressed my finger over the signature. The paper crackled beneath my skin. My knees went weak, and I sank into the chair. My whole body shook. Tears blurred my vision, but through them a fire lit inside me. "So this is how far they're willing to go," I whispered. My voice sounded strange, not broken but steady, as if some hidden part of me had been waiting for this moment. I picked up the page, held it at arm's length. The weight of it was crushing. My own son, forging my name, stripping me of myself. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about identity, about erasing me from my own life. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. My tea sat untouched, steam curling into nothing. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the kind I hadn't felt in years. Not anger alone, but resolve. Enough. I gathered every forged page, clipped them together with trembling hands, and slid them into a folder. My fingers brushed against the wooden box in the closet as I put the folder beside it. Receipts of the past, lies of the present, all in one place. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I will find a lawyer. The thought both terrified and steadied me. I had never stood in a courtroom, never faced lawyers or judges, but I had faced steam burns, endless nights, and a lifetime of sacrifice. Surely I could face this too. I wiped my cheeks, closed the folder, and whispered into the empty kitchen. "They will not erase me." Then I turned off the light. For the first time in weeks, I knew what the next day would bring. Not fear, not waiting, but action. The next morning, I walked into a law office with shaking hands and a folder pressed tight against my chest. The brass plaque on the door read, Collins and Associates. Inside, everything smelled of paper and coffee. The receptionist's heels clicked across the floor as she led me to a small conference room. My throat was dry. A young man stepped in a moment later. Dark suit, sharp tie, but his eyes, clear, steady, were kind. He extended his hand. Mrs. Lewis? I'm Ethan Collins. Please, sit. I lowered myself into the chair, clutching the folder. For a moment, I worried he would see me as just another old woman lost in her own paranoia. But when I slid the forged documents across the table, his expression hardened. This isn't paranoia, he said after scanning them. This is fraud. Something in me unclenched. Finally, someone who saw it too. He leaned forward. If you want to fight this, I'll stand with you. But you have to be ready. Court isn't gentle. I nodded. I've ironed shirts until my fingers bled. I can handle court. He smiled faintly. Good. Then let's start preparing. The days blurred into a new kind of work. Mr. Collins gave me assignments. Gather every receipt, every ledger, every piece of evidence. I opened the wooden box night after night, sorting through decades of paper. I highlighted tuition checks, mortgage transfers, car payments, each one proof that my savings had been poured into David's life. Friends came to help. Ruth from church brought her printer and made copies. Mrs. Tanaka appeared with a stack of DVDs from her porch camera. One clip even showed David shoving papers at me in the driveway. These little details matter, Mr. Brester, Collins said, tucking the evidence neatly into binders. Then came the hardest part, my testimony. We sat in his office, just the two of us. He handed me a sheet with practice questions. State your name and age. My name is Margaret Lewis. I am 74 years old, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Louder, he urged. Say it like you believe it. I tried again. My throat tightened. The words wavered. He placed his pen down, leaned closer. Margaret, these are your words, your life. Say it like you own it. Because you do. The sentence struck me like a bell. Say it like you own it. I closed my eyes, inhaled. When I spoke again, my voice was stronger. My name is Margaret Lewis. I am 74 years old. Better. We practiced for hours. Each time, my answers steadied. At first, I trembled. Then, slowly, I found a rhythm. Like ironing. Once awkward, then second nature. At home, I stood before the mirror, rehearsing alone. My reflection looked tired, but as I spoke, I saw her spine straighten, her chin lift. Did you consent to give away your assets? I asked myself aloud. No, I answered firmly, meeting my own eyes. I did not. The first time, my voice cracked. The fifth time, it rang clear. By the 10th, it was steel. My friends cheered me on. One evening, they gathered in my living room, papers spread across the table. Ruth read aloud a mock cross-examination. Mrs. Lewis, don't you think you're just confused? She asked, pretending to be a lawyer. I stood tall. I may be 74, but I am not confused. I know what I signed, and I know what I didn't. The room erupted in applause. Even Mrs. Tanaka wiped her eyes. See? She said. Stronger than you think. Each day, my fear loosened its grip, replaced by determination. I wasn't just defending money. I was defending my life, my name, my freedom. On the night before our first hearing, I packed the binders into a bag. The call log, the receipts, the video clips, all neatly organized. Beside them, I placed the wooden box. Not because I needed it in court, but because it reminded me why I was fighting. I stood before the mirror one last time, smoothed my hair, and whispered to my reflection, You've been silent for too long. Tomorrow, you speak. The courtroom was colder than I expected. not in temperature, though the air conditioning hummed steadily, but in spirit. The walls were pale, the ceiling high, the benches wooden and unforgiving. It felt less like a place of justice, and more like a cathedral of judgment. When the bailiff called my name, Margaret Lewis, I rose slowly, clutching the folder that held my life. The wood floor creaked under my steps as I made my way to the front. The judge entered. His gavel struck once, sharp, echoing. All rise. We rose. My knees shook, but I stayed upright. David was there, seated at the opposite table, looking polished in a navy suit. Claire sat beside him, lips pressed tight, eyes like shards of ice. Between them sat their lawyer, tall and slick, with a voice that dripped confidence. When the judge nodded, their lawyer stood first. Your Honor, we will prove today that Mrs. Z's Lewis is no longer capable of managing her financial affairs. She has already consented to give my clients full control of her assets. For her own good, guardianship should be granted. His words stabbed into me. For her own good. Then David spoke. He raised his hand as if swearing honesty, though I could see the lie in his eyes. My mother agreed to this years ago, he said, his voice steady. She doesn't remember signing because, well, she forgets things. My chest tightened. Forget? I remembered every sleepless night, every bill, every coin I had saved. My memory wasn't the problem. It was their greed. When it was my turn, I opened my folder. My fingers trembled, but when I looked up, I caught sight of Mrs. Hadasa, Tanaka in the back row, nodding at me. Ruth sat beside her, hands clasped in prayer. Their presence steadied me. I held up my spiral notebook. This is my call log, I said. Every threat, every demand, written with dates and times. I flipped to the highlighted bank statements. These are my ledgers, proof of where my money went. Tuition, mortgages, bills that were not mine, but my son's. I gave because I loved. But love does not mean erasure. Finally, Mr. Collins pressed play on the video clip. The screen flickered to life. There was David, in my driveway, thrusting papers at me, his voice sharp. Mom, your savings are useless. Just sign here. Gasps rippled through the room. David shifted in his seat, his lawyer clearing his throat nervously. Then came the moment I had dreaded. Mrs. Lewis, the judge said, you may make your statement. I rose. My legs shook, but my back was straight. I clutched the edge of the podium. The courtroom seemed to fall silent, the hum of air conditioning fading into nothing. All I could hear was the thud of my own heart. I took a breath. I gave life, money, and love, I began, my voice low but steady. For 40 years, I worked in a laundry shop. I ironed until my fingers split. I saved quarters in a tin so my son could go to college. I skipped meals so he could buy a car. I gave $15,000 for his home. Every dollar I saved, I gave to him. I looked at David then. His eyes darted away. I did all this willingly. But what I did not give, what I will never give, is my dignity. Not today, not ever. My voice rose. I felt it echo through the wooden chamber, stronger than I had ever heard myself. I am 74. I am not perfect, but I am not confused. My savings are not useless. They are pieces of my life, carved out of every hour I stood on aching feet, every night I worked until dawn. And I will not be erased. Not by strangers, and certainly not by my own child. For a moment, silence. The kind that crackles, alive, before thunder breaks. The judge leaned forward. His gavel tapped lightly once. This court rejects the claim. The evidence of consent is invalid. Assets remain with Mrs. Spizes. Lewis. The words struck like lightning. Relief surged through me, so sharp it stole my breath. I clutched the podium, tears spilling freely. Not because I had beaten David, not because of the money, but because I had beaten the fear that had chained me for so long. Behind me, I heard Ruth's muffled sob, Mrs. Bimis. Tanaka's whispered, yes. At the opposite table, David slammed his hand down, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Claire gathered her purse, her face pale, lips pressed so thin they nearly vanished. But I didn't look long. They no longer owned my gaze. As I stepped down, Mr. Wright Falls. Collins placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Margaret, he murmured. I nodded, wiping my cheeks. No, I said softly. We did. When I walked out of the courtroom, the sun outside was blinding, golden, warm. I squinted, lifted my face to the light, and let it wash over me. For the first time in decades, I felt free. I was not just a mother, not just a giver, not just a forgotten wallet. I was Margaret Lewis. And I still held the key to my own life. That night, after the courtroom lights had dimmed and the congratulations faded, I lay awake in my bed. The house was quiet, too quiet. The ceiling above me looked the same as it always had, cracked faintly at the corners, paint peeling in thin lines. But I stared at it for hours, unable to close my eyes. I had won. The judge's words still rang in my ears. Assets remain with Mrs. D. Lewis. My name, my dignity, my freedom. And yet, my chest felt hollow. I turned onto my side, clutching the blanket. A whisper escaped me, barely audible even in the silence. I won, but why does my chest feel so hollow? I tried to remember the moment when the gavel struck, when everyone gasped, when relief washed over me. I thought it would feel like triumph, like a mountain conquered. But lying in the dark, I realized something else. I hadn't just lost money these past years. I had lost the son I thought I had. The image of David's face in court replayed endlessly. His jaw clenched, his eyes cold, the way he refused to meet my gaze. That was my boy. Once. The same boy who held my hand at the zoo, who pressed seashells into my palm at the beach. Where had he gone? I rose from bed and padded to the closet. The wooden floor creaked under my bare feet. There it was. The old wooden box. My box of receipts, my life measured in ink and paper. I pulled it out, set it on the table, and lifted the lid. Inside lay decades of sacrifice. Tuition checks, mortgage transfers, bank slips with numbers that had cost me nights of sleep. I touched one slip with trembling fingers, a faded $500 check for David's books. It no longer hurt to see them. Not the way it used to. Instead, it felt like holding a ghost present, but untouchable. I closed the lid gently, pressing my palm flat on the wood. Was this freedom? I whispered. Keeping the money? Or should I have learned to let go sooner? The night stretched on. I made tea, but the steam rising from the cup only deepened the ache in my chest. I thought of Mrs. Tanaka's words, "You're stronger than you think." H. Hacks, strong enough to fight. Yes. Strong enough to win. Yes. But was I strong enough to forgive? Or to release the bitterness that still curled inside me like smoke? Around 3 in the morning, I sat by the window. The street outside was empty, washed pale by the moonlight. A single car passed, headlights cutting across the dark. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass. I had my money. I had my name. The law had sided with me. But freedom, I realized, was heavier than I expected. It wasn't just about keeping the assets. It was about deciding what to do with them, with myself, now that I was no longer chained to David's demands. And that thought scared me more than losing had. When dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and blues, I still hadn't slept. Birds stirred in the trees, their songs tentative at first, then brighter. I sipped cold tea, my hands wrapped around the mug. The question lingered, stubborn and unresolved. Is freedom simply holding on to what is mine? Or is it learning to release the things that no longer serve me? Stop. The sunlight crept across the floor, slow and steady. For the first time, I let it warm my face. I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew the fight inside me had changed. It was no longer just about David, or money, or even dignity. It was about what kind of woman I wanted to be in, whatever years I had left. Selling the old house felt like shedding a second skin. For weeks, I walked through its rooms, touching the walls one last time, pressing my palm against the kitchen counter where I had counted out bills for David, standing in the hallway where his voice once thundered. Each space hummed with echoes, but they no longer bound me. I sold it all. The house, the furniture, the memories heavy with betrayal. And with the money I had guarded for so long, I did something for myself. I moved into a small apartment near the hot springs, an onsen resort, the kind I had once invested in quietly, almost as a secret. Back then, it had seemed foolish, indulgent. But now, it felt like destiny. The first morning, I woke to the sound of water. Soft, steady, a lullaby of steam rising from stone baths. I slipped into a robe, stepped outside, and let the mist curl around me. The warmth wrapped me whole. My bones, weary from years of labor, softened. My skin tingled. For once, I wasn't giving, I was receiving. Around me, other residents laughed and chatted, their voices light and unburdened. They welcomed me with nods, with gentle smiles. One woman pressed a cup of green tea into my hands. "Drink," she said. "It tastes better with the steam." She was right. I joined a book club in the common hall. The first meeting, I introduced myself hesitantly. "My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm 74, and I'm starting over." The group clapped softly, as though acknowledging not just my words, but my courage. We read novels together, sipped tea, debated endings. Some nights we laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. For the first time in years, I belonged without giving anything but my presence. I also began volunteering at the local food pantry. At first, I thought it would reopen old wounds, serving, giving, but this was different. This was choice, not obligation. When I handed out bags of rice or cartons of milk, I wasn't drained. I was filled. Children smiled, mothers bowed in gratitude, old men cracked jokes as they took their share. I went home tired but light. The good kind of tired. One evening, sitting in my new living room with the window open to the scent of pine and steam, I remembered the old days. Back then, every time my phone rang, my hands shook. I feared another demand, another request, another accusation of selfishness. Now, when the phone rings, it's different. It's Ruth asking about the next book club meeting. It's Mrs. Tanaka sending me a recipe. It's the pantry director confirming shifts. My hands no longer tremble. Instead, each morning, I lift a warm cup of tea. My fingers steady, my heart light. The steam rises, delicate, and I inhale freedom with every sip. I am no longer the woman hunched over receipts, hiding her tears in a wooden box. I am no longer the mother defined by what was taken from me. The box still sits on a shelf, though. I keep it not as a wound, but as a reminder. When I open it now, I don't see loss. I see proof of how much I endured and how far I've come. The other residents at the onsen call me Oba-a-chan, grandmother. I don't mind. Some afternoons, children splash in the shallows, their laughter echoing. One little girl once tugged at my sleeve and said, "Grandma, will you sit by me?" I sat. And for the first time in years, the word grandma felt whole again. Life is smaller now. Smaller apartment, smaller circle, smaller needs. But in that smallness, I've discovered something vast. Peace. Choice. Myself. Myself. I no longer measure my worth in how much I give away. I measure it in how freely I can breathe. And so, with the steam rising around me, with laughter and friendship filling my days, I know the truth at last. I am not their discarded past. I am my own rebirth. I want to end this story the way it deserves to end. Not in a courtroom, not in steam rising from the hot springs, but here, with you. Thank you. Truly. Thank you for walking this road with me. Through the nights of fear, the days of betrayal, the hours I thought I would collapse under the weight of my own generosity. My name is Margaret Lewis. I am 74 years old. I was once told my savings were useless, that my life's work meant nothing. But I stand here now, not erased, not broken, the keeper of my own key. I know this story may sound extraordinary, even dramatic, but for many of us, it is far too ordinary. Parents who give until they are empty, children who take until there is nothing left, mothers and fathers who confuse sacrifice with love, silence with loyalty. And so I ask you, directly, plainly, if one day your own child told you everything you saved was worthless, would you stay silent? Or would you stand for your truth? It is not an easy question. I could not answer it for decades. I told myself, silence was love. I told myself, giving was duty. But silence nearly erased me, and giving nearly destroyed me. What about you? What would you do? If my story touched you, if it stirred something inside you, I ask for one small thing. Leave a comment. Share this story. Follow along. Why? Because somewhere out there, another mother is sitting in her kitchen, staring at forged papers, wiping tears she hides from the world. Somewhere, another father is listening to the phone ring, afraid to pick it up because he knows it will be another demand. Somewhere, someone is trembling the way I once trembled, not from age, but from fear of being erased. Your voice could be the hand that steadies them. Your words could be the spark that tells them, you are not alone. You are stronger than you think. Dash. I don't tell this story for pity. I tell it for connection. I tell it because I know what it is to feel invisible, to feel like a broken ledger of debts unpaid, like a savings account that no one values. But I also know what it feels like to rise, to cancel the transfer, to say no, to look your own child in the eye and say, I am not your wallet. I am not your erasure. I am me. That is why I share. That is why I ask you to share. And so, as I close this chapter, I leave you with one truth, carved out of my pain but polished by my freedom. I am not their broken savings. I am my freedom.